This is a Grab the Mic webinar from the Beam Exchange. The Beam Exchange is a platform for knowledge exchange and information sharing about the market systems development approach. And this space, the Grab the Mic webinar, is a public space where organizations can share their lessons and experiences. Always keen to hear from other organizations. But today, I'm very pleased to have three speakers, two of them from Kosovo, and also my old friend Justin. So we have Albina Berisha, who's the program manager of the Enhancing Youth Employment Program in Kosovo. And she's joined by her colleague Valbona Rraci, who is a senior intervention manager at And they're going to be talking along with Justin, for about 30 minutes. Justin is an independent consultant who I know very well because he wrote the recent rough guide to using the MSD approach for youth employment. And so this is very relevant to the program, and we're going to make some connections between the program's experiences and Justin's work on the rough guide. Probably that's enough from me, actually. Before I hand over to Albina, I just wanted to point out that we're going to have about 30 minutes of talking, of presentation from these three speakers, and then we're going to have 30 minutes of questions and answers, if I give them the time. And we're very keen to hear your questions. So please, if you haven't already submitted them, or even if you have, put them in again in the Q&A box. So use the chat to introduce yourself, but use the Q&A box if you want to put a question to the speakers, and then we'll come back to that at the end of the 30 minutes presentation. That's, I think, all for now. Like I say, digitalisation of job matching services in Kosovo. I think we've got some great story to hear from Albina and Valbona. Albina, why don't you take it away?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Mike. It's my pleasure to be here today to introduce you the project. I am project manager at but I've been with the project since the beginning, since it started 11 years ago. So I'll be also able to answer a lot of questions afterwards. We will talk about the case study that we have written specifically about the intervention on digitalization of job services. This case study was written by a consultant, Levent, who will also later answer a lot of questions about especially employment topics in Kosovo. But later we will talk mostly also about where did I work and how did this intervention start? And that's why we also have Valbona in our call, because when this intervention started, she was the one leading this intervention. Next slide, please. So I will talk a little bit about what we worked and where we have been active. And I will provide you some local context information so that you are familiar with the labor market in Kosovo. And then Valbona will later talk about why we chose this specific intervention, first of all, 10 years ago. And then Justin will talk about the findings of the case study and compare it to the rough guide of employment MSD approach in African countries, as you explained. To begin with, next slide, please, Justin. I started Inception in 2012. After 6 months of Inception, we started with the implementation. Throughout all the phases of the project, the goal has been always the same. So youth employment was the ultimate goal, while working on non-formal education, working on job intermediation services, and career guidance services. Next slide, please. Our project is funded by Swiss Development Cooperation Office in Kosovo. And as I said, the goal was always the same, especially focusing on employment of most vulnerable groups, youth living in poverty and disadvantaged youth. While we are very active in vocational skills development, our focus was mostly on non-formal education and training opportunities, especially for industry solutions that provide courses that are relevant for youth and are easier transition to the workplace. Today, we will talk specifically about the second outcome of the project, which is on private and public job intermediation services. Next slide, please. Some context information, just to let you know, for those who do not know, Kosovo is a small country located in Southeastern Europe. It's newest country in Europe. It declared independence only in 2008, after a long war and conflict with our neighboring country, Serbia. Our population is around 1.9 million. And what is very specific about the Kosovo labor market is that our population is very young, and 41% are under the age of 25. Some of the sectors with the most growth potential are ICT, food processing, and energy, also in manufacturing, because we can see that after the war, the economy had struggles, and of course, it was very difficult to create employment opportunities for all the sectors. One of the pressing issues was the high unemployment rate when we started this project. Now it is at around 20%, but when we started the project, the overall unemployment was at around 30%. And this is one of the reasons why we initially started this intervention. Another finding was that young people, especially those in the age group where the I project was supposed to be working, was nearly twice likely to be unemployed. So the youth were totally disadvantaged, and it was very difficult for them to increase their skills, to find jobs, and to create better opportunities for them. This was just to give you a brief intro about the context where we work. Well, I will now ask our colleague Valbona to continue and explain why we started this intervention and how.
Thank you, Albina. Hi to everyone. So as Albina mentioned it, when the project started in 2013, the unemployment rate was very high, about 30%. And this is especially emphasized among young people 15 to 20 years old. In addition to this unfavorable indicator, 20,000 to 30,000 youths entered the workforce every year. So the country faced a difficult economic situation and very unfavorable labor market indicators, with challenges in integrating youth into the labor market. So youth unemployment was a key issue for Kosovo that needed to be tackled by I project when started in 2013. Initially, we have undertaken a detailed diagnostic process to understand why the labor market is not functioning. This process concluded that there was an oversupply of skills, not matching the requirements of employers. Then job matching services were non-existent or insufficient, of low quality and unaffordable. Also, the service providers that did exist were basic online portals with simple job ads offering little value-added services to employers and to job seekers. So the lack of efficient job matching services, both public and private, meant very few employers were using matching services. Most employers were using print media to advertise vacancies or preferred to reach out to family and personal networks to find new employees. The analysis of I showed that the underlying cause for the underperformance of this system, of the labor market system, was lack of support to job matching service providers for positioning, profiling, and marketing through the development of demand-based and value-adding services. Services were constrained by a lack of quality providers, including market awareness, sustainable business models, and marketing strategies. Improvement in these areas would increase awareness of the benefits of job matching services to young job seekers, to their needs and behavior, and to private employers meeting skills and the type of work that they need. Next slide, please, Justin. So the project strategy or this project strategic framework was or has been designed in the form of hierarchy of objectives, or as we call it, the theory of change model. This illustrates how the overall goal of youth employment is fully aligned with large-scale and durable changes. This would be achieved through a greater number of job seekers using more relevant and accessible job matching services. For the sustainable delivery of these services, more private employers would have to be willing to pay for services to attract right-skilled job seekers, because at that time they were getting, even with the low number of job portals, they got free services. Achieving this overall objective requires growth in job matching service market via improved access to services. This would be delivered through improved competitiveness and innovation among the job matching service providers, and a greater access for young job seekers and private employers to differentiated services which would meet the market demands. Also, sector growth and improved access required a change in the job matching service market system. This would require development of a business model and products that enable shifting from basic and non-responsive job portals to a market populated by demand-led, innovative, and evolving job matching service business. This strategic hierarchy illustrates that any job matching service market intervention would have to stimulate lasting changes in the behavior and capacities of actors in job matching services. Next slide, please. Therefore, I did an analysis that enabled the team to understand what are the priorities and opportunities and the key drivers for change in the job matching service market system. The project team determined that the priority opportunity would be to partner with nascent private job matching service providers. This prioritization was assessed as being both relevant and feasible. The job matching service intervention would target commercially sustainable operations within the few nascent private job matching firms. The incentive would be increased and sustained profits. But also there was a risk that we find out, and this is that the market was too small for crowding in large numbers of job matching service providers, and the project team determined that any crowding in would relate only to young job seekers because of the limited market. How the facilitative intervention was implemented by developing the market through marketing and new value-added services will come up in next slide introduced by Justin. Please, Justin, you can continue with your slides.
Great, thanks, Valbona. So we're going to now dive into some more detail on the intervention. Before I do that, just a quick intro. I'm an independent consultant based in the UK. My background is implementing a variety of different MSD programs in different contexts, and my particular interest is on MSD for employment. So I'm really pleased to be speaking on this topic today. I'll just take you through a few aims of what I'm going to talk about. The first thing is try and give a bit of an overview of the job matching intervention based on a case study that the team has put together. I also want to then highlight some of the successes so far and touch on some of those interesting and unique aspects from this particular case. And then a big thing I want to try and do is put it into some context. So 3 things I'll mention here. The first thing is the rough guide to MSD for youth employment in sub-Saharan Africa that Mike mentioned, that I worked on last year, commissioned through the DCD. What that does is try to set up a framework for thinking through the youth employment challenge with an MSD lens. And I'll reference the rough guide a few times as I take you through the next few slides. So when I do that, you know what I'm talking about. The second thing I want to talk about is an exercise that's currently underway. It's a global mapping of MSD for employment interventions. I'm doing that together with Mike Klassen, who I think is on the line. And that's been commissioned by the ILO, Mercy Corps, and Swiss Contact. And we actually interviewed the I team as part of that exercise. So that was the first time we heard about the job matching work and a few of the other interventions. And it really piqued our interest, really interesting stuff happening there. So it's been quite interesting to position this intervention relative to the sort of wider project context in this space. And then the third thing I wanted to talk about is a new MSD for Employment community of practice. It's being coordinated again by Mike Clarkson and also Rachel Shah, who I think is on the line as well. And it's a donor and an implementer forum. It's brought together 40, 50 participants from those groups in previous sessions. And actually the last session was all about job matching as well. So again, this is a topic that keeps popping up. If you're interested to access any of those resources, there are links in the slides there, so please follow up on those. And then I just touched on a few other things as well. So I was at the Market System Symposium, and MSD for Employment was coming up quite frequently, which was really encouraging to see. And then I know organizations like SDC have been working on guidance as well on the topic. So anyway, my point here is that there's really good momentum, and there's a really interesting growing body of evidence on the topic. So let's dive into the specific intervention. So Albina and Valbona have given us a bit of context already about the labour market in Kosovo, but there are a few things I just wanted to really highlight here. So the first thing is that labour force participation for young women is much lower than it is for young men, and we're going to touch on that a few times during the presentation. The second thing is that this is a context where job matching has traditionally been through print media and particularly through social networks. And that can tend to exclude young people that don't yet have those links and networks. And we talk about this quite a lot in the rough guide. It's hard to break into those networks without a job, but it's hard to get a job without those networks. So you're kind of trapped outside the labor market. And as we'll hear in the next few slides, there are now these alternative digital channels on the market, and they're actually shifting how those job-seeking norms are operating in practice. The other thing I want to mention in terms of the context is that the economy is rapidly changing in Kosovo, so towards modern industry and services. And that shift needs a job matching mechanism that is faster and more efficient than those social relations can be. And digital matching can offer that. So dual aims. One is making job matching more accessible to young people. And the other aim is this win-win for employers, through more effective and efficient recruitment. Before we get into some of the details as well, I just want to touch on some of these top-line results. So as of today, the job matching partners that have worked with I account for up to 80% of all job vacancies, which is pretty significant, I think. There were no private providers in 2016, and today there are 34 registered private companies doing this. Job postings have increased. Businesses are paying to post jobs. Around 45% of the users are women. And then something I found really interesting, 99% are small and medium and micro enterprises. And that includes the very smallest businesses. I heard about a car wash using this service, which was fascinating to me, particularly because some of the contexts we've looked at around the world, these formal job matching services tend to be out of reach for those smallest businesses. But it sounds like we're talking in the region of sort of 50 euros to post a job here. So that's kept it pretty accessible so far. I want to just take you into the intervention. It's been running since 2013, so it's very mature across 3 different phases. Phase 1 was around innovation and piloting. So the team put out this general call to market players to pitch these plans for private job matching services. They then connected interested partners with a more mature company in Bosnia and Herzegovina to support a bit of peer learning, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then they provided cost-sharing grants around ICT infrastructure, around developing out the service offers and improving the market strategies and so on. Then phase 2 was expansion and access. So it was trying to bring additional players into the market. It was expanding services beyond Pristina. And then it was exploring new matching models, for example, around seasonal labor, to try and bring some minority groups in the country into this process. And then thirdly, consolidation and partnership. So what ended up happening was the project really focused and doubled down on 2 particular major providers. help them diversify their service offers. This other thing they did was try to promote cooperation between private job matching and the government, and then a variety of other activities, linking up with a big job portal in Africa, running an HR summit, study tours, and so on. And putting that into some context, 10 years is quite a long time for a single intervention, although there were different phases. And it demonstrates the type of time frame that's sometimes needed to bring these changes to fruition. And the other thing I'd say is that you can see there how the strategy evolved over the 3 phases as the context changed and as the market developed. I want to put the work into some more context now. So I want to touch on clarity of employment objectives and also the importance of taking this sort of holistic view of the labour market. So on the objectives point, one recommendation from the rough guide is to be as clear as we can be about the employment objectives that we're trying to pursue. Because having too many of those in parallel can lead to quite a confused strategy. And the jobs triangle is quite a useful tool here. So you can think about jobs in terms of job creation, in terms of job quality, or in terms of access to jobs. And what I did was very much focused on the access to jobs dimension with this particular intervention and kept that clear strategy as a result. There was a wider objective too, which was to help Kosovo's economy shift from that post-communist, post-conflict sort of model towards modern industry and services. And those modern firms need the right labor to be competitive. And that traditional job matching model was never going to keep up with those changing needs. Secondly, in terms of the holistic view of the labor market system, another point from the rough guide is to take that sort of holistic helicopter view as a starting point. Look at the labor market as a whole, identify the binding constraints, and then diagnose down into those. Don't come at the problem with predefined solutions. And we actually see that quite a lot in the employment space. And what I did was it worked through that sort of process and identified job matching as a binding constraint. I want to touch a little bit more on identifying the opportunity because there are some interesting points here, I think. So the rough guide talks about using those familiar relevance, opportunity, and feasibility criteria, but tailoring those to youth employment. And when we look at this particular intervention, 3 factors came together. So first, the private job matching market was starting to show signs of growing. It was relevant to the youth population, and it was feasible to intervene. So in terms of that relevance point, we've heard about the high levels of unemployment and the high levels of young people not in education, employment, or training. There was also relatively high mobile phone usage and relatively high digital literacy. And that's not the same everywhere. So, for example, some countries in sub-Saharan Africa, the rates will be a lot lower. The third point is that the services were intended to be free for job seekers, so the employer pays. And that's obviously very relevant when we're talking about low young people who are unemployed or underemployed on low incomes. Secondly, it was a growing and emerging sector. So following the labor market dynamics in the country was really relevant here. The team knew that the public sector wasn't providing job matching services to the degree required, and at the same time there were some startups in the private job matching space. So they saw this market starting to evolve. They saw this opportunity to ride that rising tide, maybe direct where the tide flowed, and they also looked at a bunch of different labor market dynamics as they went through this. So they saw, for example, that migration would probably increase the demand for job matching. More migration means greater competition for talent. So just another factor sort of pushing this as a space to work in. Then on the feasibility side, these job matching startups were obviously small companies. They were very keen, but they needed support. They needed knowledge how to do this work, and they needed finance. So there was a pull from the companies out there. There was also precedent from other contexts, similar contexts in nearby countries, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then there was the opportunity to start small. So to pilot sort of small, safe to fail bets with these companies, test the appetite, which again, we'll touch on in a minute. Putting that into some context, the team integrated labor market analysis and market systems analysis when they were thinking through these opportunities. And again, that aligns very closely with the guidance in the rough guide. And the timing was right for this type of work. But this wasn't just a lucky break. it was a result of really understanding the market and having the finger on the pulse of these different developments. I wanted to touch on partnerships because I think there are also some interesting dimensions here. So the program took this approach where it had quite an open door to partnership, but also quite rigorous requirements for longer term support. So when it comes to building those partnerships, there was this open door. So they would literally do an open call to the whole market for cost sharing support. They were keeping their fingers on the pulse in terms of which companies were growing and innovating, who those movers and shakers in the market were. And they actually supported about 10 job matching providers over the years. But only 2 companies have ended up working long-term with the project. So quite rigorous requirements for that long-term support. And an example that struck me, they wanted sustainable, high-quality models to support. So an example that I heard from the team, some of the partners were not checking job seeker profiles, they were not checking employer profiles, etc. But the 2 more professional ones were investing in that. They had people assigned to actually verifying and checking these profiles, which signaled quality and gave the project confidence in those partners. They also got to know the management teams, and that's not just what's written down. The team talked about being able to feel the energy from some of these different companies, but they combined those instincts with formal due diligence as well. So they built up this complete sort of 3D picture of the different partners, which gave confidence to move forward. There was quite an interesting example, I thought, during COVID of this long-term outlook in action. So obviously during COVID, recruitment businesses really struggled all over the world. What the team decided to do was give some short-term support to their long-term partners. So they helped them develop HR software and allowed these providers to offer it out into the market for free. What that did was help the companies make it through the pandemic. It built relationships with new prospective clients, and it signaled a commitment from in terms of being around for the long term. So in context, when it comes to the partnership side, the project tried to build quite a high level of ownership. So support was quite organic. The companies were identifying issues themselves, but within guardrails that had been set up by the program. And they were also actively managing their partners. They tried to keep very up-to-date information. They balanced that long-term support for the highest performers with the ability to exit less productive partnerships, and did so in a lot of cases, and kept quite a close eye on systems change as the core objective, not organizational development for the sake of organizational development. On the tactical side, there are 3 things I wanted to touch on here that I thought were particularly interesting. The starting point being that these partners had high will but low capacity. So the first point is around building traction. And the team was looking for opportunities for peer exchange rather than just bringing in the team's perspective. They wanted these partners to be able to learn from others in similar situations. So one of the things they did early on was an exposure visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Companies went for a week-long visit. They got to know an established job matching provider there. It opened their eyes to the market opportunity. They got to see how this more mature company was operating. And the company itself, called Collective, you can see their logo there, they were quite carefully selected. That market was, it was at the right stage of maturity, and there were enough parallels with Kosovo for it to be a useful case. Secondly, these startups didn't have much access to finance. Banks were not really offering it at the time. So the project decided to step in and provide that in the form of the cost sharing. That's on the more intensive end of the facilitation toolkit, as we talk about it in the rough guide, but it was a calculated risk by the project, and they were testing specific hypotheses. For example, that these services could be financially sustainable beyond that initial period of development. They also took small bets, so they were not committing to 10-year partnerships. It was a phased approach, it was a careful approach. They were exiting partnerships quite actively where the partner was not performing. And what happened was that the partner contributions financially grew over time, and they're actually operating now without financial support from the project anymore. The third thing I'll mention here is the focus on young women. the project did a couple of interesting things. I think, first of all, the messaging to partners was always sort of challenging them, encouraging them, supporting them to focus on that segment. And then secondly, they provided grants against targets for women using the websites. They didn't actually measure the increase in the number of male users, which I thought was quite interesting, sort of example of putting your money where your mouth is. In context, the intervention toolbox is flexible. So here, financial support was one of the main tools that they used, but they didn't kind of throw that out. They were quite selective about how they deployed it, and were quite clear about what pilots were testing for, and were quite clear about when to exit. The rough guide also talks about identifying specific target segments and working to their needs and opportunities. And the project had young women seeking work as one of those key segments. So just looking at the picture today, I've taken you through some of the top line results already, but just some of the more qualitative elements indicating changes in the wider market. So the first thing is that these private services are now recognized by citizens and employers as the main source of vacancy announcements, which is pretty significant. We've got all sorts of new services coming into the sector. We've got things like automatic matching services. Some portals are starting to specialize in certain sectors. And there are signals that the quality of matching is improving as well. Jobs matched increased from 40 to 55% over the intervention through introduction of a range of new features. And then on the response side here, there are two things I wanted to mention. One is that it seems like the public sector is now starting to shift their approach to this as well. So going from wholesale job matching to concentrating more on active labor market measures, things like job subsidies for the most vulnerable members of society, which is really interesting, I think. And then the other thing is around the social norms. Digital job matching is showing signs of actually challenging social norms, preventing young women from accessing work. So two examples. One would be around family care expectations, which is an issue all around the world. These platforms make it easier to access opportunities and offer a greater variety of opportunities through the mobile app. And then employer perceptions is something else. So the team was telling me that in the past, sometimes employer perceptions were a little bit negative towards female candidates. And as more women are able to apply through the digital apps, employers are getting to see the quality of these candidates, and that's starting to shift some of those perceptions. So in context, I think one thing is that sustainable outcomes, as it's seeming to be here, are possible with a small number of dominant service providers, assuming there's a wider response from the market. And the rough guide talks about social norms being one of the hardest elements to shift in a system like this. But we're seeing here how a particular type of service can actually support that change. And then just very briefly looking into the future. So there are all sorts of opportunities. One is integrating more technology into the process, so AI being a big one. In the landscape analysis, there are already examples of this being used in job matching. There's an opportunity to go beyond job matching and start to build this sort of ecosystem of services around direct recruitment, linking with training, linking with career guidance, etc. Building up other parts of the system, like digital literacy and trust in digital services to bring on board any groups of the population that are still struggling in those areas. Building up the evidence of the benefits of digital job matching. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting, Kosovo is a potential candidate country for the EU, and as such, they have to implement the EU Youth Guarantee Scheme, and more funding will be coming into this sort of area as a result, which could really accelerate progress. Remaining challenges, the team can tell you a lot more about this, but it seems like there are still challenges around job matching in areas like seasonal labor, which was very relevant for some of the minority groups, quite hard to get that off the ground. Secondly, at an aggregate level, labor force participation for young women is still a lot lower than it is for young men. So that's also a challenge for the future. And then, like in a lot of countries, there are still some mismatches in aspirations. So young people tending to have a preference for public sector jobs, for white collar jobs. Again, something to think about as we move forward. So I think you'll agree, a huge amount of progress over the 10 or 11 years this has been running. A handful of lingering challenges, but overall a very interesting case. So I'll pause it there. I think back to Mike, and looking forward to your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Albina and Valbona, for your presentations. Yeah, so let's move straight into the questions because we haven't got that much time. Before we go to the ones that are in the Q&A box, please add more questions to the Q&A box, everybody. There was a few that were submitted online beforehand, so I thought I'll start with one or two of those actually. So the first one is actually probably for you, Albina, from Manfred Egger at Swiss Contact. And actually, before I launch into that, let me just introduce two more people who are going to join in this panel in responding to questions, if that's appropriate. So we have Vizar Eksar, who's just joined us. Hello, Vizar, nice to meet you. And I think we might also have Julian Peach, who's yeah, there he is. Okay, oh, he's gone again. Yeah, there he is. So they can introduce themselves when they if they answer a question. But yeah, Albina, can we start with you? This question from Manfred Egger. Private job matching services. What is just? I mean, I think we did touch on this, but just remind us, what is the financing model for private job matching services in Kosovo?
Okay, Mike, just maybe to remind that also Levent is answering the questions.
Yes,
who has written the case study. So
yeah.
The business model is simple. These job matching service providers cannot charge job seekers, but they charge businesses. So businesses pay to announce job vacancies in the portal, and that job announcement is visible, reachable in the next 14 or 30 days, depends how much they pay for the service. In addition, businesses, when they establish this first contact, they may buy additional service, which is shortlisting, headhunting, recruitment services, which according to the case study is still not yet very competitive to what is being offered in the region and in EU, for example, in this case.
Okay, and let me ask Valbona a related question from Shumete Belete, which is, how does digitalization help in this process? How does it help employers assess job seeker characteristics and their aptitudes and abilities?
Thank you, Mike. I think the best way to assess the characteristics, attitudes, and other elements of job seekers is through getting feedback from employers. In our case, in Kosovo, there was, let's say, one job portal which developed a software calling it Career Navigator, through which he built up the career portfolio of job seekers, getting regular feedback from employers with whom they cooperated. How it works is that if a job portal provides a short list of 10 candidates to a company, of course, one of them is employed, 9 the others are rejected. So the system works automatically, getting feedback from the company. What are those elements or characteristics that 9 were rejected and 1 is employed? This information, the job portal includes to the portfolio of the job seekers and follows their development career path. So this is, I think, the best way that working closely and getting feedback from the employers, job portals can get or can build up the database of most relevant job seekers for businesses.
Okay, thank you.
Hope that I answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think very, very clearly. Let me move on to another question about these services to Levent. So Levent Koro, thank you for joining us as the author of the case study behind this. Did you identify the need to advocate for public-private partnerships in job matching services? And if yes, did you consider public actors to be an important or more or less important than private actors?
Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for this question. It's quite interesting, and actually it's context specific. I think very important is to know what is the overall position of the public sector intermediation services vis-a-vis private sector intermediation services. In case of Kosovo, public sector was perceived as ineffective, as both Valbona and Justin mentioned. Therefore, private sector didn't want to associate themselves with the public sector. Therefore, there was no opportunity to promote cooperation when it comes only on job vacancies. But when we expand beyond of job vacancies, when we consider job matching services, when we consider employment services, then there is a huge potential of cooperation between these two entities. Again, Justin mentioned that the EU model of youth guarantee scheme is going to be launched in Kosovo, which will bring huge resources, whereby public sector cannot manage by themselves. Therefore, the need for private actors. So in this case, yes, there is a need to advocate for cooperation. And there is also, took the initial steps to promote this cooperation. But on job vacancies, no, because of context-specific situation. They didn't want to associate themselves with the ineffective services at the moment. That is basically what the private sector is offering. Over.
Thank you very much, Rhyn. That's really useful. Okay, great. Let's move on to some of the questions in the Q&A box. We've got 5 at the moment, and I'll just sort of start. I haven't had a chance to read the most recent 2 actually, but let's start with the one that Rachel added at the beginning, which I think Julian's also beginning to answer. But Rachel, I just remind you, is involved with this MSD for E community of practice. And she asked, you mentioned that the risk of a relatively, or the problem in a relatively small market for job matching services is that, oh, sorry, Julian, you just lost me. Yeah. You mentioned that there's a risk of there being a relatively small job matching, a relatively small market. Did this prove to be an issue? Was there a lack of vacancies available to, or a lack of job creation, kind of preventing this from working? And Julian, would you like to answer that for everybody?
Sure. Sorry for moving the question to the answer box. Basically, the lack of demand was not a constraint on the intervention because there was sufficient demand to intervene in that market, and the demand has been growing. But sure, if there was a more vibrant growing economy with more jobs coming up, then the demand for job services would grow as well. So basically, now that the job matching service is better in position, then that service is ready for the economic growth. Levent also is a very good economist, and he might have something to say as well.
Thank you, Julian. Basically, the private job matching providers have also differentiated their services. So they were not relying initially, at the initial stage, they were not just relying on job vacancies. They were offering different types of services, for example, advertising services. So they were taking advertising income from companies and promoting different advertisement postings from different private sector. So in the beginning, they try to differentiate their services in order to get higher income. But when they reach out to 10,000 job vacancies, that means 500,000 of income. And 500,000 of income for a small enterprise is enough decent income. And then they were growing and growing and growing. At the moment they have 2.5 million yearly income only from job advertisement services. Over.
Right, thank you. Let's go to the other question from Rachel. Did you find, this is very practical, did you find you needed specific technical skills in your team or from consultants and to support the businesses that you were working with to help them really add value and support them in developing their digital platforms? So, and if you did need those specific technical skills in your team, was that a challenge in obtaining them?
May I answer maybe?
Yes, please, Albina.
From management perspective, I have to say that managing this intervention is quite complex, but a good move is to also hire technical expertise on labor market. For example, we always use expertise from labor market consultants and economists who understand how the labor market works. And then within the team, you need expertise of people who understand how entrepreneurship and incentives work. Basically, why would a business pay for a job announcement? Or why would this partner invest in this, you know? So you need these types of skills in the team internally who will manage the partnership, who are good team players because they need to manage the partnership. And because I saw also there were also a lot of questions, how long are these partnerships? We are talking about 10 years partnerships. We had partnerships who were 2 years, and then we saw that their market uptake was not really at the level that we wanted. So the intervention managers and the qualifications, knowledge, experience they have, their social acceptance is very, very important for these types of interventions who are complex, and especially that the future is not very clear. So because a lot of factors will influence the future, like it is influencing the HR market currently.
Thank you very much. Let's go on to a question from Prasanna, who works for Habitat. And she said, inspiring work. So this is about the partnership side. What was the typical tenure of a pilot? What's the typical duration of a pilot with a partner? And how did you typically organize cost sharings? You said that 2 out of 10 of your partners really stood out in performance. Could you share some insights on how long you worked with the other partners before exiting those relationships? Who's best to answer that question, I think? I don't know. Can one of you nominate yourselves?
I suggest intervention managers, either Valbona or Lisa.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I will try to answer to this question. As you know, the I project had 3 phases. This is the 3rd one, so around 11 years working in this intervention. The first phase of 4 years duration, of course, that we needed to work on developing the market with the job matching service provider. So we needed to take in consideration anybody that had the incentive and the will to be committed and to invest on this business. So we didn't have any criteria with which one to work. Then the market itself developed and grew up, and of course, depending on the business model, some of them dropped out naturally, not with let's say selection criteria or deselection criteria, but naturally the market itself grew up. Some dropped, some continue with the business, and out of 10, as it is mentioned, two of them still sustainably operating. But it took definitely around 4 years until we understood the market itself and who are those key drivers of the systemic change that we expected and planned to have.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Now, there's some very interesting questions here. I noticed I think, was it Justin, you mentioned at one point how there had been less success with seasonal work than with other kinds of sectors. And there's a question from Christopher Comachi asking about what are the main sectors driving economic growth currently in Kosovo, and really asking the question about if we transfer this ideas to the African context, where agriculture is going to be much more important, and obviously agriculture is very much a seasonal activity. What are there any implications for that, do you think, in terms of lessons we can learn from this work when we try and translate it to an African environment? I suppose a good maybe you can drill down into why you think it didn't work so well with the seasonal jobs.
Levent, do you want to answer, or I can?
Yes, I can answer, but I need to make a small explanation. Here, the issue was not about services that failed providing employment opportunities in seasonal labor. It failed to operate for certain categories of people, which are Roma and Ashkenazi Egyptians. Actually, this type of intermediation type of services could very well work in seasonal jobs as well, but it didn't work for specific type of groups. Therefore, I need to highlight this reasoning. And the case was that the company which provided this intermediation service was not able to cash the income from the services offered, and also there were issues with transportation of the workers, because the specific groups that were willing to work were in different parts of Kosovo. So the employer was not able to organize transportation services for this group in order to be able to engage in employment.
May I just give a context information in terms of economic sectors?
Please.
Because also the case study mentions that the timing was relevant, and it gives some arguments why. For example, it was a momentum when the service market was being developed at that time, IT and BPO, which means that international companies coming to Kosovo to invest, the first thing they were doing, they were buying HR services. So it was a type of momentum. The biggest employer in Kosovo is the retail market. They also have issues with HR, they have staff turnover. So there were some influencing factors from economy side that kind of were in the right time for the service to be developed. Currently, Kosovo is exporting mostly services, little bit of manufacturing, but we still do not have a lot of very much developed industries. We still struggle with that. However, these sectors still remain the biggest employers: retail, manufacturing, and services.
Thanks, Albina. Sorry if we jump around a little bit. The questions are quite varied, but I wanted to look at one which came from my colleague, Mike Klassen, and it's about the relationship between this kind of job matching services work and what goes on in the kind of the vocational education and training space, that what's sometimes called the VET space. And I know you had separate interventions that focused on vocational skills and education as opposed to job matching. And his question rather, is whether you saw any kind of connections or links or direct relationships going on between job matching service providers and education service providers, for example, paying attention to different trends that are happening in the job market.
I can answer to this question.
Yes.
When Albina introduced the project outcomes, the second outcome had the labor market integration outcome had the job matching and career guidance. This automatically shows that there is a close cooperation between VET institutions in Kosovo and job matching service providers on finding out and identifying qualified workforce. Because how it works is that we have established career centers at VET schools, school-based career centers, which within the organizational scheme or organizational structure, they have the coordinator with the labor market. This person within the career center works closely with job portals, and they do exchange information about the labor market trends, which requirements are more actual in the labor market, which professions are more required, and they exchange information. Just recently in October, we're going to have the yearly network event of career centers, and one of the job portals has been invited to introduce the newest in the labor market towards the career centers, because then they try to share these requirements and demands from the labor market to students and to school.
Thank you. Interesting. Okay, so let me move on to a couple of more sort of strategic questions in a way. One question actually is quite interesting. I'm just wondering, you know, Kosovo has a conflict history, and still there's a conflict setting. I mean, you know, context. And there's a question from Ang Miat Min about how you integrated job matching services into how this job matching services system kind of coped with those conflict factors, those conflict dimensions. How did it influence the program? And how did you ensure that if you like, you reached maybe people who are less accessible?
Maybe since I'm from Kosovo, I can.
Yes, please.
And then my colleagues can maybe just to explain that Kosovo doesn't have a conflict for the moment, but yes, we went through a war 23 years ago. However, our problems now are more social, related to employment, how to integrate more youth into better education, how to integrate more women, because I also saw a question there about women. But I would not say that we have highlighted any conflict sensitivity in this intervention, only for social problems, basically how to integrate more women, how to integrate more Roma, Ashkali and Egyptian, but not on other conflicts.
Thank you. So look, Pascal Fabing, by the way, we're running out of time, so this may have to be the last question. Pascal Fabing, who's my colleague from Luxembourg, he's really asked an interesting question about, given how long, and maybe Julian, you can address this, given how long the I program was, of over 11 years, did you find that you sort of were able to sort of pivot strategically in response to better understanding of what the root causes of issues were? So he focused in particular on the root causes of women's sort of poor access to formal job markets. And as the program went on, how did you address that shift in your understanding of what was blocking women from entering formal job sector?
I'll give an initial response, but then some of the women on the panel maybe want to respond better than I can. Basically, Pascal, it's a good project, and we're always changing and looking for new ways to have an effect. So we're never satisfied with the initial answer to questions about root cause analysis, and we're always looking to find better answers. So there were some opportunities for us through the project to make changes and to act on those. And one example would be we started more recently looking at the way job matching service companies use technology, use software, and whether or not they make a distinction in the way they use software according to whether it's a male or a female customer. And are there things they can do with their software to make their service more suitable according to the sex of the customer? That's one example. Another one would be we started recognizing that employers, unless they were more professional about HR, and that means being professional means thinking about, is HR, are you trying to attract women to work in this business, men to work in this business, or just very clever people to work in this business with the right skills? Are HR services being a little bit gender blind or gender ignorant? So we had an HR summit, a big event, getting businesses together to help improve the way HR happens in businesses so that they are better at using the job matching services themselves. But over to others to respond, if there's any time left.
Well, we don't have much time left, but we can always be flexible. If you want to add anything there, Albina or Valbona. Okay. Well, look, we are unfortunately running out of time. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'd like to make a very big thank you to the three main speakers who prepared so carefully their presentations.